Welcome, and thanks for joining us today for our 40th episode of the Restaurant Dealmaker Show, where we discuss pertinent topics regarding the food and beverage industry with industry professionals. My co-host today is Chuck Frank, a successful entrepreneur who has an extensive background in business with an emphasis in the hospitality industry as a former CFO, COO, and CEO of several well-known companies. Chuck was raised in the Burlingame area, as his father ran Joseph Magnin stores and was close to its founder, Cyril Magnin, who owned and operated over 40 high-end women's clothing and accessory stores throughout California and elsewhere. After Chuck graduated from the Wharton School in Pennsylvania, he obtained his CPA and worked for Labenthal and Horwath, which was at one time one of the leading hospitality and accounting consulting firms in the country. Through Chuck's father's connection with Cyril Magnin, Chuck was introduced to Cyril's son, Jerry. When Jerry Magnin was opening up a restaurant in Los Angeles called Chianti with Larry Mendel, a friend of Jerry's, Larry and Jerry asked Chuck to come back to California to become a partner and controller of their company. Subsequently, Larry and Chuck developed Spectrum Foods, and Chuck became president of Spectrum Foods, which had 16 successful restaurants in California, including Chianti, 3 Pregos, 3 MacArthur Parks, Guayamas, Spadini, Harry's Bar, Tutto Mare, and Tutto Bene. They sold Spectrum Foods to Saga, and then Saga was purchased by Marriott. They tried to buy back Spectrum, and Chuck ended up as president of Spectrum for a couple of years. Chuck was contacted by Ron Teitelbaum, the founder of Johnny Rockets, to help the company grow. And Chuck was on the board for 13 years when the company grew from 4 to 200 units. At that same time, Chuck was contacted by Bob Spivak, who owned the Daily Grill, and asked Chuck to run the company, and was on the board for 15 years, developing 37 Daily Grills, and they took the company public. Chuck formed CAF in 1989, which was a consulting company, and was asked by Barry Schneider, the owner of MAS, which was a large flooring manufacturing company, to become the COO. And they grew the company from 40 million to 200 million, and the company was bought out by DuPont. So after leaving DuPont, Chuck was CFO of a private equity group called Parkside Group, and they bought McGregor Golf Company and tripled the size of the company. Larry Mendel, who Chuck partnered with at Spectrum Foods, asked Chuck to help grow Il Fornaio, which was originally an Italian bakery, which Larry developed into a chain of full-service, high-end Italian restaurants throughout California and elsewhere. In 1993, Larry Mendel asked Chuck to take over as president of Il Fornaio, and during Chuck's tenure, they doubled the size of the company, and then they sold the company. In 2007, Bob Spivak and Chuck formed Spivak and Frank, a consulting company. Since Chuck's Il Fornaio's day, he was active in CAF Consulting Company and was involved in various projects with the Daily Grill, MacArthur Park Restaurant in Palo Alto, Dunkin' Brands, Alioto's Restaurants at the Wharf in San Francisco, and others. It's hard to believe that someone has accomplished so much as Chuck, and it's our pleasure to have him as our co-host today. Welcome, Chuck, and let me begin by asking you, where did you get this business orientation to motivate you to go to Wharton and, focus in on becoming a CPA and a super entrepreneur? How did this whole program begin?
Well, Steve, first of all, good morning.
Good
Great to see
morning.
you again.
I hope I didn't screw up the introduction too much. You had so much going on there. I might have missed some.
Well,
of
you
the
have
thought.
a few
If I do,
minor,
I apologize.
difficulties, but that's fine.
Okay,
One is
I got the gist of it.
MSA Industries, not MAS Industries.
Okay.
But regardless, I was born in Portland, but when I was 2 years old, my family moved down to California. My dad took the job as manager of the Joseph Magnin. There were 4 Joseph Magnin stores, the 4th being in Sacramento. And he took the job, became very friendly with Cyril Magnin and Cyril's 3 children who ran the company, and ultimately was planning on leaving but Cyril told Marvin that he couldn't leave because he's too good an executive. Would he handle the cosmetic concessions? Would he take over and become a leased operator? My dad knew nothing about cosmetics, but he was a very good businessman. So he said, sure, I'll be happy to do that. Moved down here to the peninsula where I grew up on, in initially Menlo Park, but then in Hillsborough, and started working for my dad in the warehouse, 5900 or 59 Harrison Street, which is now where the Gap's headquarters are. So it's now called 1 Harrison Street, but it was 59 Harrison Street then. And I worked in the warehouse from age 13 until I went off to college. I went to Burlingame High School, local school here, and my dad went to Stanford, and therefore I applied to Stanford, and I was recruited at Stanford to wrestle, actually, but I decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to school on the East Coast, so I picked two places out of a book. I had Harvard and I had Penn, University of Pennsylvania. I was fortunate enough to make them both, and I wanted a business background, so I chose the Wharton School, which has got, in my opinion, the best undergraduate business school in the country. I got to finished my 4th year there, and I could either go on and get a law degree, or I could go on and become a CPA. Since I was good with numbers, I took the easiest choice. My senior year I arranged my class schedule so I had Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays off, and then worked at Laventhal doing taxes and accounting things. And in Pennsylvania, you actually have to practice accounting for 2 years before you can sit for the CPA exam. I sat for the CPA exam, and as you said, um, I mentioned to my father after passing it that I was interested in moving back to the West Coast if something should come up. Literally the next day, he was in Jerry Magnan's office, and Jerry had started a small restaurant company called Spectrum Foods by buying Chianti in 1968. Chianti was originally owned by Romeo Salta, who's famous as a restaurateur in New York, and it was the original it was the original cast party for Gone with the Wind was held at Chianti in
Wow.
1938.
Wow.
So my dad's in Jerry's office, and he gets a call from Florida for a guy interested in working for his restaurant company as controller. My dad mentions to Jerry, you might call my son. Jerry called up. I flew out from Philadelphia on a snowy day in 1972 December, and 2 days later called my wife, said, give 2 weeks notice. We're moving to Los Angeles to run a small restaurant company called Spectrum Foods. I get there, and Jerry finds out that he has another business as well, a clothing business. He was the first Ralph
Polo.
Lauren Polo
Right.
store in the United States, and he had a partner that was stealing from him, so he went back to that, and Larry and I were left to run Spectrum Foods, and that's how that began.
So did you meet Larry through Jerry?
Yes, I
Okay.
met Larry through Jerry. Larry sold his company, Caswell Coffee Company, at the same time Jerry sold his family business, Joseph Magnan, and they were introduced by a mutual friend. They became best friends, and they took this kind of out of the place, out of the way little spot and converted it into the best Italian restaurant in Los Angeles.
Right. Right. Got it. Okay. Thank you for providing that clarity. So, with the extensive and diversified business experience you've had, what have been the main contributing factors which have led to your continued success throughout your career?
I would say there are probably two. Number one, I've been very, very fortunate in my life to have great partners. Smart, listened, knew what they were doing, and we had various businesses in various industries, but I always had great partners. And number two was I look at everything from a financial point of view, looking at a balance sheet, looking at a P&L, and I can immediately get a sense for what's going on. Therefore, I always figured if I made a mistake coming back to California, I could always go back to accounting and it wouldn't be a big problem. But then I got bit by the restaurant bug, and once the restaurant bug bites you, you're stuck there for the rest of your life.
Got it. Okay, that's well said. So, of all the business successes that you had, is there one success that stands out over the others? And please explain why that's the case.
I would say probably my moving to California to join Spectrum Foods was the most significant aspect of my business career. We were a very undercapitalized company. We were losing money hand over fist, and we didn't know that we were bankrupt. We were insolvent. And so I remember I get up to the offices, which were in the Mutual Benefit Building in Mid-Wilshire area, and I said, we can't afford these. We got to move. So I made arrangements with a carpet guy, a painter, and a moving van company, all of whom took trade because we didn't have any cash. So all we could do was give them free meals at the restaurants, and they took trade for that. And we then began to try to sell Spectrum. And fortunately, there was no restaurant Dealmaker show in those days, so we tried to do it ourselves, and we were very unsuccessful. We had a 4-unit multi-concept restaurant that people said can never make it. In those days, all you wanted was formula-based stuff. In the early days, the Victoria stations, the McDonald's, or what have you, those were the successful restaurants. Everybody said it won't make it. So we just decided, since we couldn't give it away, we would make it successful. And we focused our restaurant by restaurant and converted them into successful restaurants. Larry and I used to share an office and share a secretary. And we drove a couple of secretaries crazy, I think. But even more importantly, we used to talk constantly day to day because we had desks facing each other. Larry would come down every Monday morning. He would be he lived in San Francisco that period of time, and when he came down to LA, he lived on a boat in the harbor. And so we would meet at the office. I would walk into his office every day and say, Larry, we can't make it till tomorrow. We don't have enough payroll. We don't have enough this. We don't have enough that. We would talk through it. We would move on, and we just slowly converted each of the restaurants to a successful restaurant. And that was my most exciting time in the restaurant business. Every day was a new problem. My wife actually worked for us for a year as the bag lady. I would get on the phone, find out where we were overdrawn every day, and move money from the accounts where we had money, and she would be the one that took them to the bank. And we prayed that American Express checks would get there on time and that bank cards would get there on time, and that was what kept us in business.
Wow, that's quite a story. So, of all the business successes you've had, is there one success that stands out over the others?
Well, I think Spectrum itself was the success. And
Yes.
that was the piece. I mean, I did a lot of stuff where we grew companies very fast, and that was lots of fun. And dealing with franchisees was lots of fun. But having your own restaurants and watching them become successful one at a time. And we used to go and have major meetings, just Larry and Jerry and I. We had a house at the time. My parents had a house in Palm Springs. We would go down there and we would do our strategy for the next year. And we would always think what concepts we wanted to do, how we wanted to move forward. And we were pretty radical in those days because we were a multi-unit company and people didn't have multi-unit companies then.
And that they were all very successful and very high regard in
We were
San Francisco.
we were very fortunate. We focused mostly on Italian restaurants, and
Right,
Larry took a crew of managers and chefs every year to Italy to really
right.
get it authentic. But we also did Mexican. We went down to Mexico and spent a week learning items that we should have and put on the menu. We had a MacArthur Park, which was originally a kind of eclectic kind of a menu. It's a 1972, each flower, each bud, each tree, each other, that kind of feeling.
Yeah,
And we
it's a great
converted
restaurant.
it to ribs in 1981. And in order to do that, we took our team, which was Bill Higgins, Bill Upson, Larry, and myself, and we went back to Chicago, which was known for ribs, and we had ribs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for a week. Met with all of the food suppliers and came up with a distributor that provided our ribs, and we bought a ton of ribs a week and we would buy it for a year in advance so we could set our price, know it was going to be selling for, and wherever the market went, we didn't care. We were locked in for the 12 months.
Right.
Unlike
And
today.
MacArthur Park in Palo Alto, are you involved in ownership there with Foz?
Yes, I was involved in the ownership there. Foz called me because we sold Spectrum in 1984 to Saga. Saga sold it to American Restaurant Group in 1986. And I stayed at Spectrum until 1989 because each of our managers had a profit sharing plan. We put away 5 cents an hour for all employees of the company. We're way progressive for the day. And I remember when we sold to Saga, Larry and I had the great pleasure of walking up and handing people checks for as much. The biggest check was $50,000. The littlest check
Wow.
was $5,000 to all of our employees who'd been with us for all of the years from 1972 to 1986 when we sold, and or 1984 when we sold, and that was really an exciting experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. So
And
Foz is
and then I actually told Anwar I would stay for 2 to 3 years running Spectrum because I wanted to make sure all our managers and chefs who had profit sharing, in addition to the 5 cents an hour,
right.
would get paid their profit. And 2 years and 6 months to the day, I walked in, handed my keys to Anwar, and said, "You get a day, a week, a month, whatever you want." He took my keys. He said, "I'll take them. Thank you very much." I then went down with my wife. We went down to the desert. And I was going to take a year off and walk the kids to the school bus in the morning and pick them up in the afternoon. My wife fired me from that job. So the first time I was fired from anything. And she said, "You're ruining my life. You have to get a job." And that's when Ron Teitelbaum called and when Bob Spivak called, and therefore I formed in '89 CAF Restaurants, which still exists today.
That's great. Great. So, in studying your career history, you've had continued leadership roles in the hospitality industries and other industries. And what have been the biggest challenges you've experienced throughout your career?
Well, I think that the biggest challenge that the restaurant industry faces then and now is people. It has
Yes,
always been people. The problem we have now is that basically minorities, specifically handle job, minimum wage job, bussers, dishwashers, that's how everyone starts in the restaurant business. You get trained in that and you can move up in the role, especially in the kitchen. And I
right.
think finding good people has always been the most difficult part of the restaurant business. The
Yes,
second is the government. I think the good about the government is if it weren't for the government, restaurants as we know it wouldn't exist today. Because between PPP1, PPP2, ERC, and RRF, the four programs they put together primarily for restaurants, kept people employed during COVID. COVID was by far the most difficult period of time I've ever lived through in the restaurant industry, and we're still facing many of the challenges that go back to that period of time.
yeah, no question. You brought up an interesting story about, people starting out in the restaurant business washing dishes. And I'll tell you a cute little story. My father, always wanted to encourage me to go into the restaurant business because, he owned the Zim's restaurants, as you know. And so what he would do is on Saturday and sometimes Sunday when I was like, 9 or 10 years old, would bring me into the restaurant, while he was talking to managers, and told the local manager to put me to work while he was meeting with the manager. So I would trim and grind, chucks, because we used to make our own, patties, trim and ground the chuck, make patties by hand, and make milkshakes and all kind of stuff. It's to get me indoctrinated at an early age, since I was the only son, to come into the business. And so when I was 13, I was in Boy Scouts, and I wanted to go to a jamboree, which was like a national camping trip. And it cost, a couple $100s. And so I asked my dad, would you pay for me to go to the jamboree? He says, well, I think, son, it would be a good idea if you could pay for that yourself. And I said, well, can I start working in the restaurant? He says, no, you've got to be 15 years old to get a work permit, and you're too young. And by the way, my cousin, David, owns a gas station. And maybe you can sort of work under the radar there, part-time on weekends and maybe during the summers to make some money to pay for the jamboree. So I started at 13 working in the gas station on Saturdays, and then sometimes during the summers, part of the summer, cleaning lube rooms and pumping gas and doing very greasy, type of stuff. And his motivation was really clear, that he wanted me to really appreciate when I was 15 to be able to get into the restaurant and start washing dishes. On my 15th birthday, we had a store at Market in 10th, we subsequently moved to Market in Van Ness. And so I got to start washing it. I really did. It was really a big. I went from axle grease to kitchen grease. I started washing dishes was a wonderful experience compared to working in the gas station. I was, I had a lot of interaction with people. I could eat whatever I wanted to eat in the restaurant, and I was inside. And so cleaning toilets was an upgrade. So that was the psychology. And I found out many years later that he paid my cousin David to hire me to work in the
That's
gas
great.
station. Isn't that a great story? And it
Well, it
really,
reminds me of a friend, my friend Bob Spivak, my partner at Spivak and Frank. His
uh-huh,
father owned restaurants in Los Angeles in the 40s and 50s.
right.
And his great aspiration in life was to become a dishwasher. And he used to go in with his dad, and when he got big enough so they could put a bench so he could stand on it to wash dishes, he became a dishwasher too, and
That's
subsequently
cool. Yeah,
subsequently entered the restaurant business and became very successful with a grill on the alley in Beverly Hills.
yeah, that's cool. Really cool. So, Chuck, what is your favorite part of the hospitality business?
I think clearly the people part is the best part. I mean, it's a good both guests, which are important, and our employees, which are more important, or as Bob calls them, team members. I mean,
Mhm.
that is what makes this business so exciting is you're working every day is a new problem, is a new issue. Even if you've dealt it with before, it has different hair on it. And so you deal with it. And I really love the people in the industry. I find some of the smartest, most entrepreneurial people I've ever dealt with come into the restaurant business. I try to talk most of them out of going into the restaurant business, but if once they get the bug bite, they're there.
Yeah. You have really an unusual twist to your background. Having dealt with many financial people over the years, I found them not to be operationally oriented. They're basically they're sort of focused in on the finance areas of the world. But you have a very unique background, being adept to being immersed in the operational arena as well as the financial arena. What are the underlying qualities about you that give you that broad-based experience to be operationally and financially oriented? Because it's such a rare find I have found over the years.
Well, I've found that most people, like we have managers and chefs in all restaurants, or some whatever the titles. It might be AGM, it might be GM, it might be whatever. It's a chef or a sous chef. It's amazing to me that people run these big businesses that are three, four, five, sometimes $10 million businesses and don't know anything about finance at all. So my
Right.
motivation was to teach them how to work through their problems. I figured when we had our monthly P&L meetings, if they could ask the right questions, and answer them themselves. Their job was to know the answers to the questions that I was going to ask. And I had to teach them how to read a general ledger, what effect inventory fluctuations have on product costs, how to price a menu, et cetera, because it's not just a simple process.
Yeah, that very well said. So, what changes do you see in the hospitality industry in California because of the current economic challenges we face today? You know, the shortage of employees, the high operating expenses, occupancy costs, insurance, everything going through the ceiling, coupled with the fact that there's a lot less, you know, income available for people to go out and frequent restaurants. Disposable income
Well,
is
there
been
is
limited.
that. But California is a very, very, very difficult place to run a business. And I think government really is a big part of the problem in this case. In San Francisco, minimum wage on July 1st this year is going to be $18.67 per hour, plus another $3 plus for the health insurance required to be covered by the state of California. So it's ridiculous. And if you're in the fast food business, you have more than 60 restaurants worldwide, you're paying your employees $20.70 an hour. That's unbelievable. In Texas, as an example, the other extreme, you can pay a tipped employee $2.18 per hour
Right,
and paying the same, we're paying that same person $25 an hour
right,
in San Francisco. So San Francisco has become very, very expensive and really difficult. Now you add to that the fact that we're going to have less people wanting or willing to do minimum wage jobs because of the immigration status of people today. I mean,
right.
I remember a great story in the old days at Spectrum. I came into the office one day and we had no employees at one of our restaurants at the greenhouse. It
Hmm.
was we walked in and the INS had raided, this is now early 70s, and there
Right,
were no I-9s and didn't make any. They had raided two or three houses where all of our people lived, and they got there and there was a chef and a manager. Now we had three other restaurants in LA, and so we were able to move people from the other restaurants over to the greenhouse and the potting shed, but it was a real problem. Now we have I-9s, which people find ways around, but now we're going to have lack of people willing to become a dishwasher or to become a busser or to becoming a maid in a hotel. I mean, I think our industry is being hamstrung by Washington, number one, and number two, by the state and the cities who make building almost impossible to get something built in a reasonable period of time for a reasonable cost. Those are the problems I see, and everything else, whether it's insurance or food costs, all these are putting upward pressure on a business that the average restaurant makes 3 or 4 cents per dollar of rent,
right.
and
Yeah.
that's why the failure rate is so high in our industry, about 80% within 5 years.
Yes, exactly. That's a statistic that I always quote. Yeah, and it's what's really sad is that a lot of these baby boomers that have been in this business for 20, 30 years and want to exit and were hoping to have enough money from the sale of their business to have a reasonable retirement are finding that their business is worth far less than, what it could have been if they had sold much earlier because of all this buildup of all these costs that you have mentioned and because,
Well,
you know,
that's absolutely, you're seeing that very directly. But I
oh,
mean, to
absolutely.
me, COVID, the city of San Francisco was moving very positively right before COVID, and it just stopped. All of a sudden, one day you went from doing $10 million a year, which we were doing at Aliotos, to zero the next day.
Yeah,
Zero. The government
yeah.
stopped us from doing business, and that was very, very difficult to survive that period of time.
Right. Yeah, it's very disconcerting to see what's happening. So, what is your prognosis for the restaurant, the independent, non-franchise, non-chain, the average restaurateur in California?
Well,
how are they going to survive?
I think there's a number of changes that are in the offing. Number one, the fine dining segment is
Hmm.
coming under severe attack. It's
Hmm.
become very, very expensive. And I think most cities, San Francisco, Los Angeles, most major cities will have a few fine dining places that make it, but not the number that we are used to in the past because
Hmm.
it's just become too expensive. Secondly, for sure, robotics is going to really have a huge influence on the industry. I mean, you're not just flipping burgers. You're going to see robots doing almost all the kitchen work in the fast casuals and the fast foods. You're already used to walking into a kiosk now where the customer sees the order, places the order, pays for the order, and waits for the food to be delivered. That's just going to get more and more extensive as time goes on. So I think robotics is a huge, huge change that's going to be taking place. The consumer isn't patient like he used to be. He just wants to be in, get his food, and leave. And anything that speeds it up is what he's interested in. The customer still has his taste is much more extreme than it used to be. They're going very much for uh, what I call street food, for spicy foods. This generation loves to experiment with food. It's
Hmm.
everything goes full circle in the restaurant business. We started with halt. Well, I'm going to forget my thoughts here. In the restaurant business, we started with concept. A restaurant had to have a good concept. Am I on still? Yes. It had to have a good concept. Then Larry and I figured it also had to have three legs to the stool. It had to have a good concept. It had to have a great food and great service. And you've got to have all three of those to be successful in the restaurant business. I think that's still basically true.
Hmm.
But I think what people want when they come into the store today isn't necessarily what they wanted when we were doing it.
Yes.
Our generation brought wine into the restaurants. At Spectrum, we were the first company I know of that had private label wine that we used to serve for house wine. And we had great wine. We did a deal with CK Mondavi and had fabulous house wine with our own labels on it. The next generation has gone to beer. The current generation seems to be moving back now to hard liquor, which was our parents' generation. So it's gone
Yeah.
full circle in the process.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going to happen with restaurants. I think we're going to see more fast food, more quick service, less fine dining than we used to see, just because the cost of doing business is so high.
Yeah, very good response. What do you think of this takeout and delivery niche that seems to have really skyrocketed since COVID? And in general, I mean, my perception of this is that the food is definitely inferior. There are very few foods that travel well. At Zim's, we used to cringe every time somebody ordered a Zimburger to get to go before they had foam, you know, uh, packaging, etc. You just put it in a wax bag and then put it in another bag, and you got it. And it was very inferior. It was mushy. It just didn't taste as good. And there's such a big movement for this younger generation to do this takeout and delivery. What you're thinking
Well,
about that?
actually, I'm not a big fan of restaurant delivery. Like you, when we did takeout at MacArthur Park in San Francisco, I would take every dish home, which was a 20-mile ride down south, and I would
Uh-huh.
eat it at home. And so we didn't do certain fries. We wouldn't put French fries on the menu because they got cold, they got soggy, they weren't good. And so we had very specific elements of what we do. But a couple of things have changed. Number one, the packaging has become much bigger. I know a pizza joint that's one of my clients used to do 50% in-house, 50% to go. It's now almost 90% to
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
because people are. And I think what's happened is the packaging is better, the delivery systems are better, but the problem with the delivery systems is they charge for them. And
Mhm.
so they increase the price to the customer, and the restaurant doesn't make any more money on it. Frankly, I always thought the takeout, when I analyze it, always was a loss leader. But when it's 90% of your business, you can't have a loss leader of that stature. So I think that the packaging is better. I think that some of the food, the street food, is used to being eaten to go. So that's fine. I still think I don't find eating restaurant food at home is nearly as good as eating it and having somebody serve you. You don't have the dishes to do, you don't have the other things. But apparently, the younger generation doesn't mind that.
Yeah, evidently not, for sure.
I don't agree with that myself, but then again, I'm an old-fashioned guy, so what can I
Yeah.
say?
So I concur with you. Your thinking. Yes, I just feel it's very inferior, and quite frankly, we'll only do it occasionally when my grandkids are here in mass and they want pizza, and we order pizza to go.
Yep, that's
And
we do the same thing. When I'm up in Portland or down in San Diego and we're getting food, we get it home and put it in the microwave and warm it up, which doesn't help it any, but it does keep it hot.
for sure. So, if you were advising a seasoned restaurant manager that never was a restaurant owner, but was considering owning his first restaurant, what advice would you give him?
Well, first I try to talk him out of it because
Right.
everybody who comes to me, the first thing I try to do is talk them out of going into the restaurant business, saying you're much smarter taking your significant other, going out and spending the night and buying dinner and going home. Or you can sit there and burn $100 bill every day if that gives you greater pleasure. But once I get beyond that, I tell them to make sure that they have a great partner. If they're a front of the house guy, make sure you have a back of the house guy that you like, that you can work with, and he's your partner because it's a 24/7 job. It's 7 days a week, now five in cities like San Francisco because a lot of the restaurants aren't open Saturdays and Sundays.
Right.
But that too will come back eventually. But I think it's a very tough business. And also make sure you have enough money in the bank to survive your first 3 months where you're going to lose money.
Yes.
If you don't, great. But everybody when they do it, they don't do really serious budgets. And a serious budget isn't what you hope will happen, it's what you think will happen. And then you have to make moves to make what you think is going to happen to what you hope happens happen.
So, what are the parameters that you advise a restaurant guy that's opening up a restaurant as far as how much working capital? You said 3 months, but when you say 3 months, are you talking about 3 months of total operating expenses, three
Yes.
months of
So I tell them to have at the very least $100,000 in reserve, no matter what
okay,
you do. And that's
so
assuming it's not a big restaurant, it's $100,000 a month restaurant.
right,
So have $100,000 extra because things happen. It just
yes,
happens in our industry. And you're ready to open, and the government comes in and said, oh, I don't care if that guy said your flue is wrapped. It's not adequately wrapped. Go redo it again. So that costs you another $40,000. But
sure,
you've got to be prepared to handle initial losses, which is why so many restaurants fail so fast. They get open, and literally 2 weeks later, they're closing because they don't have any
yes.
extra money.
They don't have a contingency plan. Yeah, they don't have working capital. Yeah, that's what we advise. I usually use the thumb rule of 6 months payroll, which
Yes.
may translate into the 100,000 again, depending upon the size of the restaurant, etc. But unfortunately, I've seen over the years so many good restaurants that have closed because they didn't build enough working capital into their budget initially, and they got into debt and they had to borrow money, and when they got to the point where they became profitable, they had so much debt that they could never see a profit and consequently had to close and sell. And I've
No,
seen
it's
that
very,
a
very
number of
common
times.
story. I mean, I watch them. They build up all their credit cards to max, and they can't pay them off when time comes. And that's why having enough working capital is really critical. Also, have a budget. most of these guys make up numbers and they say, that's what I'm going to do. They have no basis for it. They come from a restaurant that's, let's say, very successful. And people always walk into a successful restaurant at 7:30 at night and say, oh, they're making a fortune. They're
Yeah.
not making a fortune.
Yes.
That's the problem because they're not there on a Tuesday lunch when you got 7 people that you're serving. And how do you
Exactly.
stay open for that? And that's
Yes.
one of the changes that's a result of COVID is places like San Francisco still are not back to any sort of an office community working environment that makes
Yes.
sense.
Right. And that's been the benefit of restaurants in the peninsula and in the
And the
suburbs where people that
neighborhoods.
normally would go into San Francisco for a night in town and have dinner in the city, and it's a very negative feeling in a lot of parts of the city to do that. I mean, we go to the theater at either the Kern or the Golden Gate, and I cringe having to get from my car after I park my car to walk to the theater, because it's so sketchy, down there.
No,
Hopefully,
I think that is probably, and I think fortunately our current mayor is addressing the safety issues. But I know when I go to the Golden Gate or the Kern, I know that I'm going to have to step over people shooting up in the streets.
yeah,
I feel safe walking down to the show, and I'm not going to schedule a dinner before that because I don't want to be in the city that long.
sure. No, I feel the same. We absolutely. So, if you could change any particular event and/or decision that you made in your career, what would that change be, and why?
Well, I'm such a logical guy. I'm an accountant by trade that I analyze everything, I discuss everything, I do everything, and I always think it's going to have the right opinion. So I would almost always do it. As I said earlier, when I do it a second time, I learned that it isn't a question of execution. It was just a bad idea. So I allow myself to make the same mistake twice, but not a third time. And fortunately, I haven't done a third time. I've done a couple of more than once that I would wish I hadn't done. I've converted a very successful concept in Huntington Beach, which was a fish house, to a third MacArthur Park, and it ended up being too good for the audience. It was great. We did a great job with it, and our business cut in half. So that was not a good decision to make. But these are things you have to do. You only learn in life from your mistakes.
Right. So, you've dealt with many strong, demanding personalities in your career that were perhaps challenging people to work with. What principles do you practice in dealing with these individuals so there would be mutual respect between you and these challenging individuals?
Well, that's a very good question because I have had some wonderful partners and some very difficult to work with partners as well.
Yes.
And I I stay true to myself. I walk in, I discuss something rationally, I give them my opinion, I try to convert them into my thought, but if they are absolutely set on their ways doing something different, I will give in. And I don't harp on it, I just move on to the next subject. I mean, I surround myself with smart people. And
Yes.
once you're dealing with smart people, you have to listen. And I try to listen. Larry gave me a wonderful paperweight that I keep on my desk. And he says, when you're president of a company, you're 1/3 coach, 1/3 referee, and 1/3 cheerleader. And I think that's a great way to run your life.
Yes. Well said. Well said. Is there anything else you would like to mention to the group here that perhaps I haven't covered that you think be meaningful
Well,
them for them
how are
to?
we doing on time? Because
We're
I'm
we're we're fine on time. Yeah.
because I love the restaurant business. I also, which you didn't mention because I forgot to tell you, I was a member of the board of directors of the California Restaurant Association for many years, probably 15 years, and
Uh-huh.
I was also the head of the Golden Gate Restaurant Association for a year while they were transitioning away. I let Scott Roderick talk me into this job that was supposed to be 1 day a week. And it took
Yes.
me 4 days a week to do. And I never had enough time between doing that and my other clients. And in that, my comment to the current executive director, Lori, is that you've got to take on City Hall. You cannot be bamboozled by City Hall. If you think an idea is bad, you got to go tell them it's bad. You got to tell them why it's bad, and you have to come up with a solution. And I noticed that this year, I think it was Proposition M was on the menu in San Francisco, was that city business taxes for a restaurant or any business doing less than $5 million is zero. And that's what, and so therefore, that's what she pursued, that's what she executed, and she got it on the ballot and it worked. So I think you have to be involved in the industry itself. I mean, I always went back to the restaurant show in Chicago every year, and we
Yep.
would meet with Rich Melman and Larry Levy and Mike, a group of guys, and we would discuss the industry 3 days before the meeting. We'd talk about problems we had. I remember when the Levys had a food poisoning incident at one of their restaurants provided by one of their suppliers. And so what I did when I came back to San Francisco, I created a managers meeting and had each of the managers come to the office. And I had a film crew out in front of the office, and they would ask the manager, "We understand you had a fire at your restaurant. What's the problem?" And it was like catching a deer in headlight. We taught them how to respond to that. If you don't know, say, "I don't know." If you need time, tell them you'll get back to them in time. And those are the kinds of things you never think about. You know
Yes.
that you're going to have a fire somewhere at some point in time. So prepare your managers how to deal with those issues. And I learned that at the restaurant forum we went back to.
Nice. Great information. All right. Well, thank you, Chuck, for the very informative discussion today. And if someone wants to get to have contact with you, what's the best way to do so? Is there an email address
You
they can
can
reach you at?
you can send me an email at chuck@cafrestaurants.com or call me at 650-401-5807. Now, don't get panicky if I don't get back to you within an hour, because I don't answer any telephone calls that I don't know who the sender is, but I do listen to my voicemails and get back to people. But
That seems
I'm
wise.
really kind of, my time now is I turn down more clients than I take,
I'm
but
sure you do.
I love this business. That's a great.
Yes, it's very apparent that you do, and you've been looked upon as being one of the leaders in the industry. And I've learned a lot just from hearing your philosophy today, and I appreciate your sharing your philosophy with me and with our audience. So thank you very much. Our future Dealmaker show co-hosts for 2025 include in July, two of our most successful agents, Patrick Tota and Andy Maribel, who were actually both former clients, both as sellers and buyers, and have turned out to be amongst our most successful agents at Restaurant Realty. And they co-host a popular podcast called Restaurant Deal Making Exposed. They will be our guest hosts in July. In August, Emily Winston, who's the founder and CEO of Boychik Bagels, which has been acclaimed as the best bagel in the Bay Area, and they opened its first store in Berkeley in 2019, and now currently have about 9 San Francisco Bay Area locations and one in LA as well, shipping their bagels throughout the country, will be our host in August. In September, Kevin Weinberg, the chef owner of the Walnut Creek Yacht Club, one of the top seafood restaurants in the Bay Area for almost the past 30 years, will be our co-host. In October, Dan Baker, who again is a former client, he used to own Marché aux Fleurs, which is a very high-end table farm to table restaurant in Ross. He's a former client, and he's an agent now. He was the chef owner of Marché aux Fleurs for 21 years. Will be our co-host. So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and especially the great presentation that was made today by Chuck. If you want to get in touch with me, I can be reached at steve@restaurantrealty.com, or I can be reached toll free at 888-995-9701. Take care of yourself, take care of others, and again, thanks for joining us today.